My name is Eleanor Carter, and I'm 60 years old. What I'm about to share will forever change the way you look at your own family. Just 3 days ago, my own son, Mark, and his wife, Stephanie, shoved my husband Robert and me off a 90-foot cliff. As I lay broken and bleeding, gasping for air, I heard Robert whisper hoarsely, "Ellie, don't move. Pretend we're dead." But that wasn't the most unbearable part. The true horror came when Robert revealed the secret that shattered me more than the fall ever could, a truth our children had hidden for 25 years, for 4 decades. Robert and I built what we believed was the perfect family. Every morning in our cozy suburban home began with the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the kitchen and the sound of sparrows outside our window. I taught second grade at the local elementary school, always coming home with funny stories about my students. Robert ran his own carpentry shop, where his rough yet gentle hands could turn plain wood into beautiful heirlooms. We had 2 sons, Daniel, our firstborn, full of light, laughter, and kindness, always helping his father in the shop and shielding me from worries. And then Mark, 5 years younger, quieter, and more reserved. I loved them both with every part of my heart. A mother never admits to favorites, or so I thought. Sundays were sacred. After church, we gathered around the oak table Robert had carved himself. Daniel would eagerly talk about studying engineering, while Mark mostly pushed food around on his plate. Life was simple but rich. In the evenings, Robert and I strolled the trails around our small town, dreaming aloud of grandchildren, retirement, and growing old together. I never imagined those walks were training for the one that nearly killed us. Family gatherings filled our weekends. My sisters, Margaret and Lydia, brought their families, filling the house with laughter and chaos. Kids racing through the halls, women swapping recipes, men fixing things in the yard. Through it all, Robert was my anchor. After 40 years of marriage, he still brought me wildflowers from the roadside, still helped me grade papers, still asked me to hold boards steady while he cut them. We were a team, or so I believed. But perfect happiness often hides the deepest fractures. When Daniel turned 20, something shifted. Tension simmered between him and Mark. I'd overhear their whispered arguments in the hallway. But the moment I appeared, silence fell. Robert brushed it off as brotherly squabbles. I wanted to believe that because I needed to believe we were still whole. Then came that October night, 25 years ago. Daniel never made it home for dinner. We waited until midnight. Then Mark stayed in his room, pretending to study, but something unsettling lingered in his eyes whenever I asked about his brother. Robert searched with neighbors until dawn. They combed every path, every trail, every corner of our little town. At sunrise, they found Daniel's body at the bottom of the gorge. The police ruled it an accident, that he had slipped in the dark. I clung to their version, because the alternative was unthinkable. Daniel's funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore the same black dress I'd worn for my mother's funeral. I wept until my body was hollow, while Mark sat strangely calm, his silence chilling in hindsight. Robert held me upright when my legs buckled, whispering comfort that I now know must have tasted bitter in his mouth. After Daniel's death, Mark changed. He became attentive, helpful, almost too loving, as though trying to fill a void, or cover one. I thought it was grief. I thought he was stepping up as the only son left. How blind I was. He was crafting a mask, hiding the monster underneath. Years passed. The pain dulled but never disappeared. Mark married Stephanie, a sweet woman from a nearby town, and together they had 2 children. She called me Mom and always helped in the kitchen when they visited. Mark inherited Robert's gift with wood and ran a carpentry business of his own. For a while, I let myself believe life had given us a second chance. But lying at the bottom of that gorge with shattered ribs and blood in my mouth, I realized every bit of that happiness was a carefully staged illusion. The cracks began showing 6 months ago when Robert and I decided to update our will. Between our house, the small piece of land I had inherited, and our savings, we had nearly $200,000 set aside for our children and grandchildren. It was Mark who pushed the idea. "Mom, Dad, you're both 60 now. You need to have everything in order," he said with that practiced smile I now recognize as sinister. Stephanie stroked my hand, her voice honey sweet. "We just want to make sure you're protected." How foolish I was to take those words at face value. Our family lawyer, Mr. Howard, laid out the options: trusts, dividing assets among grandchildren, or a traditional will. Mark pushed hard for him and Stephanie to be named sole heirs. claiming they'd fairly handle everything for the family and care for us in old age. Robert agreed without much fuss. My husband was always more trusting than me. I hesitated, remembering Daniel's promises of always looking after us when we grew old. But Daniel was gone, and Mark was the only son left. We signed the papers that Tuesday afternoon. I remember Stephanie wore a green dress and hugged me afterward, whispering, "Now, we're truly one family forever." Her words gave me a chill I couldn't explain. Mark shook Robert's hand with a smile that never reached his eyes. That night, while I cooked dinner, an unease sat heavy in my chest. For the first time, I feared I had made a terrible mistake. Every corner of our home held a memory. Every room whispered the story of our 40 years together. The kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, the workshop where Robert crafted his masterpieces, the yard where our children, and later our grandchildren had played. I couldn't imagine life anywhere else. When I told Mark and Stephanie this, I caught something in my son's eyes, a flash of irritation that chilled me to my core. "Mom, you're being irrational," Mark said, his voice sharp in a way I'd never heard before. "This house is too big for two people your age. If you fall on the stairs or something happens, how would we get to you in time?" Stephanie jumped in, her tone honey-sweet but insistent. "And think of the upkeep. It must cost a fortune. It would be much smarter to sell now, while the market's high, and move somewhere more age-appropriate." Robert began nodding along. My husband had always been practical, and I could see him turning over their arguments in his mind. But deep inside, I felt something was wrong, something far darker than concern. That night, after another tense conversation, I finally asked Robert if he didn't find it strange that Mark was suddenly so invested in our finances. "Ellie, he just cares about us," Robert said as he brushed his teeth. "Maybe we should think about his suggestions. We're not young anymore." But there was a flicker in his eyes, a shadow he couldn't quite hide, and only now do I realize he had already begun piecing together a truth I hadn't even suspected. Things escalated when Mark suggested we give him power of attorney over our finances. "It's just precaution," he explained smoothly, while Stephanie poured tea in our kitchen as if it already belonged to her. "If something happens to either of you, we can handle things without legal complications." He made it sound so logical, so natural, almost convincing, yet his insistence unsettled me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Robert's steady breathing, wondering why I felt such dread. The next morning, I called my sister Margaret. She had always been sharper than me, less trusting, more attuned to people's hidden motives. When I told her what Mark was pressing for, she went quiet. Finally, she said, "Ellie, doesn't it strike you as odd that Mark's so desperate to control your money? He's successful. He has his own business. Why would he need this level of access?" Her words hit me like ice water. She was right. Mark had never asked for money, never shown signs of financial strain. So why this sudden obsession with our estate? That afternoon, when Mark came over for yet another future planning talk, I confronted him. "Son," I said carefully, as we sat in the living room, "why is it so important to you to have control of our finances? Your father and I are still capable of making our own decisions." His reaction was immediate and terrifying. His face hardened, and in his eyes, I saw something cold, calculating, something that reminded me of someone else. "Mom, it's not about control," he said tightly. "It's about love, care, and responsibility." But the way he said responsibility sounded more like a warning than comfort. Stephanie finally spoke up, her tone sweet but firm. "Eleanor, we only want what's best for you. It's painful to see you worry about things we could easily take off your shoulders." That night, after they left, Robert and I had our first serious argument in years. He accused me of being paranoid, of looking for problems where there were none. I insisted that something was wrong, that Mark had changed. "Robert," I said as we stood side by side washing dishes, "do you remember what Mark was like before Daniel died? He was different then, more distant, darker. Something about him scared me." Robert froze mid-motion, the plate still in his hand. Slowly, he turned to me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen before, recognition. "Ellie," he said quietly, "there are things about Daniel's death I never told you." My heart thudded so violently I thought it would break through my chest. "What about Daniel's?" Robert sank heavily into a chair at the kitchen table, the same one where Daniel used to do his homework, where Mark sat silently through so many meals. He buried his face in his hands, as though trying to wipe away memories he'd carried for 25 years. "The night Daniel died, Robert began, his voice broken. Mark wasn't in his room studying like he claimed. I saw him leave the house around 8. I followed him. I'd been worried. He'd been acting strange, more resentful, more aggressive. He paused, staring at his hands as though the truth were etched into them. I saw them arguing by the gorge. Ellie, I heard them screaming terrible things at each other. The room spun around me. What were they arguing about? I whispered, though part of me didn't want the answer. Robert lifted his head, and I saw tears in his eyes. Tears he hadn't even shed at Daniel's funeral. They were fighting about the inheritance, he said. Mark was furious that Daniel, as the eldest, would inherit more according to tradition. But there was more. Daniel had found out Mark had been stealing money from our savings account. He had proof. He'd been investigating for months. I staggered back, clutching the wall. My youngest son, the one who had seemed so devoted after Daniel's death, had been stealing from us all along. Why didn't you ever tell me? I demanded. Robert's voice cracked. Because when I got to the gorge, it was already too late. I found Daniel at the bottom, lifeless. Mark was trembling, crying, repeating over and over, "It was an accident. It was an accident." He swore Daniel tripped when he tried to hit him, that he was only defending himself. Tears blurred my vision. "But you believed him," I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Robert nodded, his face heavy with decades of guilt. He was my son, Ellie. Richard was gone, and Mark was begging for help. I told myself it was an accident. I told myself he'd learn, he'd become a better man. And as for the money, he promised to repay it slowly, that he had only taken it for a business venture gone wrong. I believed him. God forgive me. I believed him, because I needed to. I stumbled from the table, clinging to the wall. 25 years of my life, every smile, every gesture, every shred of trust in my surviving son, had been a lie. Did he ever pay it back? I asked, though Robert's expression had already answered. Never, he said. In fact, he kept stealing, and I pretended not to see, because facing him would mean admitting I had helped cover a murder. Every time I stayed silent, every time I looked away, I became his accomplice. The horrible truth sank into me like a blade. That's why he wants control of our finances now, I whispered. Not out of love, not out of care. He wants to finish what he started 25 years ago. Robert nodded grimly. And, Ellie, there's something else. Asterisk, a lifetime lived in a house means every corner holds a memory. Every room keeps a chapter of our 40 years together. The kitchen where I cooked 1,000 dinners. The workshop where Robert shaped wood into heirlooms. The yard where our children and then our grandchildren ran and shrieked. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. When I told Mark I couldn't bear to leave, I saw a flash of irritation cross his face that crawled under my skin. Mom, you're being irrational, he snapped in a tone I'd never heard from him before. This house is too big for 2 people your age. What if one of you falls down the stairs? We might not get to you in time. Stephanie chimed in with that honeyed concern I'd grown to trust. And the upkeep must be enormous. Why not sell while the market's good and move somewhere smaller and safer? Robert, always the pragmatist, began to weigh their arguments. He was naturally practical. He thought in charts and logic, but something about the way Mark pushed made my bones cold. A few nights later, after another of those strained discussions, I asked Robert straight, didn't he find Mark's sudden interest in our money odd? Ellie, he just cares about us, Robert said while brushing his teeth. Maybe we should listen. We aren't spring chickens anymore. But there was a shadow in his eyes I'd never seen before. The hint of a thought he'd been hiding. Only now do I understand he had already started following threads I hadn't even noticed. Then Mark suggested he take power of attorney over our finances. It's just precaution, he said smoothly, while Stephanie moved around our kitchen as if she already owned it. If something happens to one of you, we can manage things without legal headaches. He made it sound sensible. He made it sound loving. The insistence, though the way he pressed, made my stomach turn. That night I lay awake listening to Robert's breathing, hardly daring to breathe myself. The next day I called my sister Margaret. She's always been sharper than me, never one to give people the benefit of the doubt. When I told her, she was quiet for a long time. Eleanor, she said at last, doesn't it strike you as strange that Mark is so desperate to control your money? He runs his own business. Why would he need this? Her words landed like a slap. He'd never begged or borrowed. He'd never shown signs of trouble. Yet here he was, suddenly bent on legal control of our lives. When Mark came by that afternoon for another planning chat, I confronted him. Son, I asked, keeping my voice steady. Why is it so important for you to control our finances? Your father and I are capable. His face changed. It hardened in a way that wasn't like my boy at all. For a breathless moment I saw something cold, methodical, and dangerous. Mom, it's not about control, he said, voice tight. It's about love, care, responsibility. But the way he said responsibility felt like a threat. Stephanie added her practiced gentleness. Eleanor, we only want what's best for you. Let us take some of the burden. After they left, Robert and I had our first real argument in years. He accused me of paranoia. I told him something was off with Mark. As we washed the dishes, I asked him if he remembered what Mark had been like before Daniel died. Robert stopped. The plate in his hands went still. Then, very quietly, Eleanor, there are things about Daniel's death I never told you. My heart slammed against my ribs. What things? I breathed. Robert lowered himself into a chair at the table where Daniel had once done his homework. His fingers trembled as he smoothed the place that had seen so much of our life. The night Daniel died, he said, voice breaking. Mark wasn't in his room studying. I saw him leave the house around 8. I followed him because he'd been acting different. They argued at the gorge. I heard them screaming. I heard things about money. My world narrowed. Money, yes. Robert closed his eyes. 3 days before he died, Daniel came into my workshop. He told me he'd found evidence that Mark had been skimming money from the family savings. Small amounts at first, then more. Daniel was investigating. I felt the floor give way beneath me. The son, who had been tender after the funeral, who had made himself helpful and indispensable, had been stealing all along. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Robert's answer was a choke. When I reached the gorge, it was too late. Mark was there, trembling, crying, saying, it was an accident. It was an accident. He begged me to help him. He said Daniel tripped trying to hit him, that he was only defending himself. I believed him. He was my son. I told myself it was an accident because I couldn't bear anything else. Tears spilled from me. And the money. He promised to repay it, Robert said. He swore he needed it for a business that failed. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. He never paid it back. He kept taking, and I looked the other way because admitting it would mean admitting I'd been party to a cover-up. The truth cut through me like glass. That's why he's pushing to control our finances, I said hoarsely. Not out of love. To finish what he started. Robert nodded, face grave. And I found out something else a few weeks ago. He went to his desk and produced folders he'd hidden until that moment. I've been quietly checking Mark's books, he said. His carpentry business isn't what he claims. It's on the edge of bankruptcy. He owes well over $100,000 to banks and suppliers. The numbers in his papers shook in my hands. Mark, the successful man he'd pretended to be, was a desperate failure, living off lies and stolen funds. Does Stephanie know? I asked, remembering the way she steered conversations toward our savings. Robert's face went cold. I think she does. She asks very pointed questions about our accounts, the house value, life insurance. Those are not innocent questions. They're questions from people calculating what our deaths would be worth. Hearing the words "our deaths" made me sick. Until that moment, I'd imagined Mark wanted only to steal or cheat. But if he'd killed his brother for money, what wouldn't he do to his parents? Henry, I grabbed Robert's hands. We have to go to the police. He shook his head, defeated. With what evidence, Ellie? I'm an accomplice now. If I speak, I go to jail for covering something up. Who will believe a 65-year-old man who hid this for 25 years? He was right and wrong at once. We were trapped between the risk of telling and the risk of staying silent. We argued, then planned. We'll be careful, he said, trying to convince himself. We'll gather proof before we could decide how. Mark called. Hi, Mom, he said with that now menacing sweetness. Stephanie and I thought it would be lovely to celebrate your 40th anniversary in the mountains next weekend. A family hike, pictures, a picnic, just perfect. My blood ran cold. I glanced at Robert. He wore the same look of terror I felt, a polite invitation that sounded like That's a sweet idea, son, I managed. Let us think about it. After the call, we sat in numb silence. The mountains, I whispered. He's planning to take us there to stage an accident. Robert's nod was as white as his lips. Like the gorge, he said. Only this time, we might not wake up. We did not sleep that night. We lay holding each other, whispering plans and pleas. In the days that followed, we played the part of the unsuspecting parents. Mark and Stephanie visited. hugged, and spoke of the trip with bright smiles, while I felt the steel of their intentions. On Wednesday, Stephanie arrived carrying provisions, and that same radiant smile which now struck me as a mask. "Eleanor, darling," she said, hugging me with hands that would one day shove me from a cliff. "I bought supplies for our picnic, cookies, water, fruit, and my new camera. I'll take pictures you'll cherish forever." I looked at the items and imagined them used to stage a scene. She even took out an expensive camera, the one who would capture our last faces. Mark came in with a pristine hiking pack. "Dad," he told Robert with a fake cheerfulness, "I brought all the safety gear, ropes, harnesses, lanterns. First day, we're covered." Every word was a mockery. The safety gear would be part of the script to convince any coroner this was a tragic accident. "Isn't this a bit risky for people our age?" I asked, straining for a reason to bow out. Stephanie stroked my cheek with practiced tenderness. "That's why we picked an easy trail. Children do this trail. Mark and I will look after you the whole way. Look after us until the moment they did the opposite, when they left." Robert and I sat shivering in the living room, not from the cold but from the terror coiled inside us. "We can't go," I said, clutching his hands. "We simply can't." "If we don't go," he said, sober, "they'll find another way. Maybe a house fire, a stage break. At least in the mountains we know the script. We might be able to catch them in the act." His logic was terrible but true. We had few options. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We go," he decided after a long silence. "But we prepare. I'll hide my phone and record everything. If we survive, we'll have proof. If we don't," his voice broke, "at least someone will hear the truth." Friday was a quiet, heavy day. Robert revised his will one last time. He pulled a sealed envelope from his drawer and confessed he'd written a letter to my sister Margaret explaining everything. Daniel's death, Mark's theft, our fears. He hid the letter with our important papers. If we didn't come back, Margaret would know where to look. That night we lay awake, whispering pieces of love and memory, as if they were prayers. "Eleanor," Robert said, "these 40 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the mistakes, I love you." Saturday dawned, clear and cruel. Mark arrived whistling and bright, calling out, "Morning, lovebirds, ready for your big adventure?" Stephanie floated behind him like a bride. Breakfast was forced smiles and brittle conversation. Mark unfurled the map and spoke about the lookout. Breathtaking views of the valley, a perfect spot for photos. He described the steeper sections casually. "Nothing an experienced hiker can't handle," Stephanie added, smiling. "We were neither experienced nor fit for a steep ascent. They'd picked a route to wear us down." At the trailhead, the forest was all beauty and menace. Bird song and the shallow roar of a river felt sinister to me. Mark and Stephanie moved like actors in a play they'd rehearsed for years. I caught the same cold glint in Mark's eyes, the one I'd seen the night Daniel died. The first hour of the trail wound pleasantly through ferns and moss. Stephanie stayed ahead, snapping pictures and pointing out wildflowers with perfect cheer. Mark walked behind us, ostensibly watching over our slow steps, but his gaze was a blade. After an hour, we hit the steep part. My legs began to fail. Robert wheezed. They had chosen this stretch on purpose, to sap our strength and make us vulnerable. I felt the plan tightening like a noose. Every step forward felt like a step toward the unknown. "We're almost at the lookout," Samantha announced cheerfully. But according to the map I'd studied at home, we still had at least another hour of hiking left. Her lie told me everything I knew. They never intended to take us to the real lookout. The place where they planned to kill us had to be much closer. As we hiked, I forced myself to memorize every detail of the trail, every twisted tree, every jagged rock that might serve as a marker if I somehow survived and needed to tell the police where it all happened. Charles was doing the same. Now and then, our eyes met, full of fear, but also determination. We knew we were walking toward our own execution, but it was the only way to get undeniable proof of their plan. "Oh, look at that," Samantha suddenly shouted, pointing toward a massive rock formation on our right. "That cliff must have an amazing view. Why don't we climb up for some special pictures?" My stomach twisted. That was it, the place they'd chosen for our deaths. The cliff rose nearly 100 feet above the main trail. A steep, narrow side path led up, far more dangerous than the one we'd been following. Loose rocks, no trees to cling to. And at the top, an unforgiving drop into a gorge lined with jagged stone. "I'm not sure that's such a good idea," I said lightly. forcing my voice to sound casual. That trail looks a little dangerous for people our age, but Eric, my son, was already walking toward it, his backpack heavy with climbing gear he had no intention of using to save us. Come on, Mom, he said, using the same coaxing tone he'd had as a boy whenever he wanted something. It'll only take a few minutes. Samantha's right, the photos from up there will be spectacular. The way he said spectacular made me shiver. They wouldn't be spectacular for us, only for the investigators who would see them later as evidence of an accident. Charles gave my hand a quick squeeze, reminding me his phone was recording every word, every step. We had no choice but to go along. If we refused, they'd just find another place, another excuse, to kill us. The climb was brutal. The stones shifted beneath our shoes, and more than once, I nearly lost my footing. Every step confirmed what I already feared. This was the perfect place for murder. If someone slipped, survival was impossible, and there would be no witnesses. Almost there, Samantha called from above, reaching the top with the grace of someone who'd rehearsed this path many times. Eric followed, then reached back to help Charles and me finish the last stretch. His hands on my arms felt less like support and more like talons. The view was breathtaking. An endless valley stretched below us, mountains in the distance, and a river weaving through the trees. Under any other circumstances, it might have been a beautiful family moment. Instead, it felt like the set of a nightmare. Stand over here for the photos, Samantha instructed, positioning herself at the edge. I want the valley in the background. Charles and I walked slowly toward her, every step bringing us closer to the precipice. Eric circled behind, clearly calculating angles and distances. Perfect, Samantha said, lifting her camera. Now, hug each other and smile. We did, probably for the last time, as she snapped picture after picture. Each flash felt like lightning before a storm. Take one more, Eric suggested, his voice sharp. But stand back a little so the background looks better. One more step would put us right on the cliff's edge. Charles and I locked eyes. The moment had come. We stepped back, the abyss yawning behind us. Samantha raised the camera again, her sweet mask gone, her voice now cold. Smile, she said flatly. This is going to be your last picture. Eric lunged forward, arms outstretched, ready to shove us into nothingness. But Charles was ready. At the last second, he grabbed Eric's wrist and yanked him forward with all his strength. If we're going to die, Charles roared, you're coming with us. For one horrifying moment, the four of us dangled at the edge, locked in a deadly Samantha shrieked, scrambling to help Eric, but the weight was too much. The ground crumbled, and then we all went over, screaming, tumbling together into the gorge, the wind roaring in our ears, the rocks rushing up at us. The impact was shattering. Pain exploded through me, bones breaking, blood flooding my mouth. I was certain it was over, that Eric had won. But then I heard Charles' voice, weak but steady. Anna, don't move. Pretend we're dead. And that's when I realized, against all odds, I was still alive. Anna, are you okay? Charles whispered. Yes, I breathed back, my voice trembling. I'm alive, but badly hurt. My leg's broken, he admitted, choking back pain. And I think a few ribs are gone too. What about you? I forced myself to take stock. My right arm throbbed like fire, my head pounded with each heartbeat, and my shoulder screamed every time I moved. But I was still breathing. That was more than I had dared to hope for. We're hurt, but alive, I whispered. Charles shifted faintly, the phone's still recording, but no signal down here. That was the true horror. We were alive, but trapped at the bottom of a gorge. No way to climb out, no way to call for help. If nobody found us, we'd die, slowly bleeding, starving, forgotten. Charles, I whispered through clenched teeth, before it's too late, tell me everything. What really happened the night Richard died? For a long moment, only the wind moved above us. Then he let out a deep, broken sigh, like a man finally releasing a burden he had. That night, he began softly. Richard came to me in the workshop. He was furious. He had bank statements in his hands. He'd uncovered proof that Eric had been stealing from us for months, at first small amounts, then thousands. Richard wanted to confront him immediately. I closed my eyes, my body aching as much from the truth as from my injuries. I begged him to wait until morning. Charles continued, but he wouldn't listen. He said he couldn't stand another night knowing his younger brother was a thief. So I followed him. I was afraid. Richard's temper was bad, but Eric had changed. He had a coldness in him that frightened me. Charles' voice faltered. When I got to the gorge, they were already screaming at each other. Richard waved the papers in Eric's face, shouting that he was stealing from his own parents. Eric denied everything, called him crazy. Richard threatened to tell us the truth himself. That's when Eric snapped. My blood froze. Eric shoved him. Charles whispered, his voice breaking. It wasn't an accident. He pushed him with everything he had. I saw Richard fighting for balance, clawing at the air, but then he fell. Tears blurred my vision, hot against the blood already staining my face. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Charles groaned, the weight of his guilt pressing through every word. Because when I reached him, Eric was shaking, crying, begging. He swore it was an accident, said he couldn't lose me to Anna. He was my only surviving son. How could I turn him in? How could I destroy what was left of our family? But you knew, I said bitterly. Yes, he admitted. I knew, and when he promised he'd return the money, I believed him, but he never gave a cent back. He just kept stealing, and every day I stayed silent. I became more of an accomplice. Before I could answer, distant voices echoed through the gorge. Eric and Samantha had found help. Soon, rescuers would be harangued. Our murderous children would play the performance of their lives. Grieving survivors of a tragic accident. Helicopters thundered above, ropes rattling against stone. The moment of truth was coming. Anna, Charles whispered urgently, clutching my hand. The phone recorded everything. Samantha's confession. Eric calling us obstacles. It's all there. But if they see us alive now, they'll take the phone. They'll destroy the evidence. He was right. If they realized we'd survived and overheard their plotting, they'd finished the job. They're down here. Eric's voice rang out, hoarse with feigned despair. My parents, please, hurry. His acting was flawless. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed him. Stay calm, sir, a rescuer replied. We're coming down. Samantha's sobs followed, each one perfectly timed. We were just taking pictures. It all happened so fast. The rock gave way. Her lies cut deeper than my wounds. The rescuers descended quickly, their gear clinking against the cliff. Charles squeezed my hand again, reminding me, stay still. They're here, one shouted. 2 down, still alive. I fought to keep my eyes closed as gloved hands checked for my pulse. Ears pressed close to my mouth. This man's critical but stable, one rescuer said of Charles. The woman's pulse is faint. I need the med team immediately. Perfect. To them, I was half dead, safe enough to transport. Paramedics secured us. Oxygen masks pressed against our faces. Every instinct screamed at me to open my eyes, to beg for help. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. The man's stable but critical. A medic reported over radio. The woman's in grave condition. Pulse is barely there. Evacuating now. Relief washed through me. We'd make it to the hospital. Away from Eric and Samantha. Away from their grip out as we were lifted. I heard Samantha's sobs, Eric's broken voice, rescuers calling them brave and miraculous. If only they knew the truth. In the helicopter, the paramedics worked frantically on Charles. His injuries were worse than mine, and fear twisted in my chest that he might die before we could expose our son. Ma'am, one paramedic whispered near me. If you can hear me, hold on, we'll be there soon. His voice was full of real compassion, the kind I hadn't felt from my own son in years. When we reached the hospital, chaos exploded around us. Doctors shouting, nurses running, hands lifting me onto a gurney. I kept my eyes shut, still feigning unconsciousness. But inside, my mind was racing. I had to find someone I could trust. Someone to hear the truth. And soon. My heart nearly stopped. They had discovered me. I was such a poor actress that even my body betrayed me. It happens, sometimes, the doctor murmured. Extreme trauma can confuse the body. We'll keep a close watch. The next few hours are critical. We've done everything we can. Olivia let out a sound that was supposed to be a sob of pain, but to me, it was more like a sigh of relief. Can we see them? Ethan asked. Just for a moment. We need to say goodbye, just in case. The doctor agreed, and soon I heard footsteps nearing my bed. This was the most dangerous moment of all. I had to convince my murderous son I was truly dying. I felt Ethan's hand brush against mine, and every instinct screamed at me to pull away, but I couldn't. Mom, he whispered, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. If you can hear me, I love you. I'm so sorry this happened. His words were poisoned honey sweet on the surface, lethal underneath. Then Olivia leaned closer, her tone soft and false. Helen, dear, she murmured, you've been like a mother to me. We'll never forget you. Lies. They would only remember me because they would carry the weight of murdering me. But then Ethan leaned in closer, his whisper, colder than ice. I hope you've learned your lesson. Mom, you should never have asked so many questions about our finances. Some truths are better left buried. Just like Matthew. My blood froze. He had just confessed. He had said Matthew's name. Even without a recorder, there was a witness, Nurse Claire. I saw her stiffen by the monitor, her eyes widening in shock. She had heard every word. What did you say about Matthew? Olivia hissed, clearly rattled. Ethan flinched, realizing he had said too much. Nothing, he muttered. Just, Mom always wondered about that night, but it doesn't matter anymore. It mattered more than anything, and Olivia knew it. Her voice turned tense. Ethan, let's go. The doctors need space. Their footsteps retreated, but I felt the shift. They had exposed themselves. Nurse Claire hurried to my side, her voice low. Ma'am, if you can hear me, what I just heard wasn't normal. If you're in danger, give me a sign. With every ounce of willpower, I moved my finger once. Her breath caught. Oh my God, you're pretending. I twitched my finger again, twice this time. She leaned even closer. If those people did this to you, move your finger 3 times. I didn't hesitate. 3 sharp movements. Claire gasped. Her face hardened with resolve. All right, I'll talk to the doctor, but you must keep pretending. Do you understand? I gave one last twitch of my finger. Minutes later, she returned, this time with the head physician and 2 uniformed officers. Ma'am, the doctor whispered. Nurse Claire told us everything. You're safe now. The officers are here to protect you. The urge to cry nearly broke my disguise. Can you open your eyes? One officer asked gently. Slowly, painfully. I let my lids lift. The harsh hospital lights stung. But then I focused on the faces around me, hopeful, relieved. Thank God, Claire murmured. I thought I was losing my mind. The officer stepped forward. I'm Detective Harris. We understand you may be in danger. Can you tell us what really happened on that mountain? My voice was hoarse from hours of silence. My son and his wife pushed us. What followed was a whirlwind of statements, recordings, and confessions. I told Detective Harris everything: Matthew's mysterious death, Ethan's thefts, the pressure to change our will, and finally their attempt to kill us. But most importantly, my husband Daniel had proof. Your husband has recordings? Harris asked, his eyes narrowing. Yes, I rasped. On his phone. Years of secrets, their plans, their confessions, everything. When Daniel awoke, weak but conscious, he handed the phone over. 2 years of lies, he said firmly. All here. Technicians combed through the files while Ethan and Olivia lingered in the waiting room, pretending to be grieving children. They had no idea the noose was already tightening. After an hour, Harris returned, his expression grim but triumphant. The evidence is clear. Confessions about Matthew, theft, and attempted murder. We have more than enough. My chest tightened. Will you arrest them here? If they realize we're alive, don't worry, he cut in. We have officers in place. Once the warrant is signed, it's over. He glanced at the papers in his hand. And there's more. We dug into Ethan's finances. Not only is he bankrupt, he owes money to dangerous loan sharks. Without your inheritance, he won't survive the month. The truth hit me harder than the fall from that cliff. To my son, I wasn't a mother. I was a lifeline. Our deaths weren't just convenient, they were essential to his survival. Tears burned my eyes. And the children? I asked, my voice breaking. They'll go into temporary care, Harris replied gently. But you can apply for custody once you recover. The thought of raising Ethan and Olivia's children was both unbearable and the only light in this darkness. They were innocent. They deserved a real chance at love. A knock sounded at the door. An officer entered with signed warrants. Harris nodded. It's time. From my window, I watched officers moving into position outside. Downstairs, Ethan and Olivia likely whispered about funerals and inheritance, unaware that the walls of their deception were about to collapse. After 25 years of silence, justice had Ethan Black and Olivia Black. The officer's voice rang out, firm and final. You are under arrest for the murder of Matthew Black and the attempted murder of Helen and Daniel Black. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, Olivia's shrill cry split the air. What are you talking about? We're the victims. Our in-laws died in an accident. Ma'am, the officer replied evenly, your in-laws are alive. They've provided irrefutable evidence of your crimes. A stunned pause, then Ethan's voice, breaking with disbelief. That's impossible. We saw them die. They were dead. His outburst was caught on police recorders. Another nail in his coffin. Almost instantly, Olivia's voice shrieked over the radio, turning on him. It was all his idea. I never wanted this, he forced me. You liar. Ethan exploded. You were the one who suggested the cliff. You planned every detail. And just like that, their alliance of years crumbled, each clawing to save themselves. Detective Harris returned to my hospital room an hour later, his expression a mix of grim satisfaction. They're in custody, he told me, and the fact they're blaming each other only strengthens our case, but there's something else. My stomach clenched. What else? He held up a small digital recorder. We found this in your son's backpack. He'd been recording conversations with you and Daniel for weeks, trying to gauge whether you suspected anything. A chill ripped through me. What does that mean? Harris's sigh was heavy. It means he knew you were close to the truth. That trip to the mountain wasn't spontaneous. In one recording, Olivia tells him, we have to act fast before they go to the police. Their calculation, their cold planning it, left me breathless. They hadn't just tried to kill us, they had monitored us like predators stalking prey. There's more, Harris continued. Your son not only owed dangerous loan sharks, he also forged your signature to access your accounts. If you had died, he would have drained everything instantly. I felt the betrayal cut deeper. How much? About $50,000 over 5 years, Harris said. He kept it small, so you wouldn't notice, but it adds up. 50,000 our life savings, stolen bit by bit by the very boy I had raised. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews, attorneys, and endless phone calls from the press. Reporters called it the most shocking family betrayal of the decade. My sister, Margaret, rushed in from the next town, sobbing as she wrapped me in her arms. Helen, I always knew something about Ethan felt wrong after Matthew's death, but I never imagined this. Her words gave me a strange comfort. At least my instincts hadn't been blind all along. And the children? I asked in a whisper. Margaret's face fell. I saw them yesterday. They're confused, asking why their parents aren't home. Too young to understand. Our attorney, Albert, came soon after. The case is airtight, he said confidently. We have recordings, confessions, and financial evidence, but their lawyers are trying to push for a lesser charge, arguing it was a crime of passion, not premeditation. A crime of passion, I snapped. They planned this for weeks. Equipment, location, everything. Albert nodded gravely. I agree. That's why your testimony is vital. But I must warn you, it will be brutal to face Ethan in court. He was right. The thought of staring into my son's eyes as he denied, twisted, and lied, tore at me, but I had to. For Matthew, for Daniel, for my grandchildren. 3 weeks after their arrest, Daniel and I finally returned home. He still leaned on crutches, and my arm was in a sling, but we were alive. The house felt ghostly, frozen in time, the breakfast dishes still in the sink, the bed unmade, the flowers Ethan had brought me that week sat wilted on the kitchen table. Do you think we'll ever be happy again? I asked that first night back. Danya wrapped his arm around me. I don't know, Helen, but we're alive. We have the truth, and for the first time in 25 years, no more secrets. 6 months later, the trial began. When I finally faced Ethan in court, I searched his face for a trace of the son I once knew. There was none, no remorse, no sorrow, only a cold, calculating stranger. When I finished testifying, I looked him in the eye. Ethan, I don't know who you are anymore. My son died the night you killed Matthew. Whatever has lived in his place all these years is a monster I helped raise without realizing it. The jury deliberated for 3 long days. In the end, both Ethan and Olivia were found guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Their sentence, life in prison, without parole. A year has passed since then. Daniel and I are in the process of adopting our grandchildren. They are beautiful, innocent children who deserve to grow up in a home filled with love, not lies. Every night, when I tuck them in, I tell them stories about their Uncle Matthew, the brother they'll never meet, but whose kindness, honesty, and